For this final session, what I want to do is I want to discuss pads and chords. As I mentioned in the last session, pads are very different from strings because they're more slowly evolving. They're usually a much wider, thicker timbre that really fill out the mix. And it's because of that thicker nature that they're usually played in breakdowns or when there's little else going on in the mix. For example, if you have a wide pad playing in the mix, you may only have a drum loop and perhaps the odd incidental instrument, because you got to remember that we're drawn to movement, and pads are not only huge frequency hogs, but they move too, so our ears are naturally going to be drawn to them. It's just so important that we don't confuse our listeners. If you have a thick, evolving pad, and along with a bass that's jumping all over the place and a lead over there that's jumping all over the place, what are we supposed to attune to? When we listen to music, we want to listen to it as a whole, but we always tend to attune to one particular part of the mix, whether it is how the bass sounds, the lead timbre, the drum rhythm, the chords. There's always one part that really grabs our attention. Now, imagine that you have this wide, evolving pad, a bass line jumping around and a lead jumping around, and well, basically, we become uncertain on what to attune to. Is the bass line the important part of this record, or is it that pad that's just really sticking out and moving all around the mix, or is it that lead that's jumping all over the place? And on top of that, you've got to remember that a thick pad, bass, drums and a lead is going to be a real problem when it comes to mixing, because, as I've said, the pad evolves, it sweeps the frequencies heavily, so we need to ensure that we have the room for it to do that without masking everything else that's playing along. Now, as I've said, pads and chords, the two are intertwined as they are with strings and chords. So first thing I want to do is I want to show you the MIDI I've written for these pads. Now, looking at that, I bet a lot of you are thinking, well, hang on a minute, you never mentioned chords like that before. No, I didn't, and I've deliberately left it until now to try and express the importance of creative thinking. I would hope that until this point, you were pretty confident with your chords. You know how to create any number of chords, how to chain them together to produce a progression. It's all pretty easy. You thought you had it all down and you just had to play around a bit, and now you're confronted with chords like this. Well, I've mentioned it numerous times, but musicians sit down and they play around for hours or weeks coming up with progressions. They're not going to spend hours, days or weeks just knocking in a few simple triad chord progressions. They push the theory and see what happens. And basically, that's what I've done here. This chord structure here follows our theory exactly. Everything I've discussed throughout this DVD is here in theory. The only additional element which has created this change is me. I put some lateral thought into it, being creative, and come up with this. So what I want to do is, before we program a timbre for this, I want to walk you through it. Now, we spent this DVD discussing chords, progressions, harmonic balance, and a harmonic rhythm. So we'll go through each one of those, and I'll talk you through how it all follows along. And we'll start off with the chords. Now, as I said at the very beginning of this DVD, in the very first session, the theory states that chords are made up of 3 or more notes. Well, there's 3 or more notes in all of these chords here. I also mentioned that the theory states that harmonically pleasing chords come from odd intervals. Well, unsurprisingly, each of these are at odd intervals. They're placed at harmonic intervals for the key, which is I've written it in F minor, by the way. You can see there that it starts at F and we end at F. Now, what's probably thrown you here is that I haven't layered them on the 1st, 3rd, 5th, 7th intervals in an order. Well, no, I haven't, but then the theory doesn't state that notes must be one after the other. It simply states that chords should consist of the 3 notes: the root note, the bottom interval, and the outer interval. For example, the notes in F minor would be, I'll just call that up here. There, the notes in F minor there, the F, G, A flat, B flat, C, D flat, E flat. So if we have a root at F, the note to follow that could be an A flat followed by a C. So a basic triad there would be F, A flat, C. Well, basically, we have that here. That's what it is there. There's just a slight difference. The chord simply goes F, C, A flat, F. And all I've basically done there is I've just missed out the first A flat. And instead of putting it down here, I've put it there. Now, by setting these wider apart like that, it's going to produce a thicker timbre on the synthesizer. Basically, all I've done is I've thought about the pad and applied some lateral thinking. I've took the theory, the music theory we've discussed throughout this DVD, and I've warped it a little. As long as it contains the root, the bottom interval, and the outer interval, there's no rule stating that I have to put them one after the other on the same position they appear in the scale. Now, another thing you may have noticed here, if you just have a look, is there. Can you see that there? Well, they're not intervals apart. Well, no, they're not. But the G does exist in the F minor scale. So I haven't introduced an accidental note here. If you think about it, all I've done is suspended the chord for an incredibly short period of time before resolving it. That's just a suspension. There and there, they're just suspended chords. And all I'm doing is basically I'm jumping in straight afterwards and I'm resolving them. Now, again, can you see how we're taking the theory and we're playing with it? We're creating triads, but we're playing with the order of the notes. We're creating suspensions, but we're resolving them quickly. That is what this is all about. It's all about creative thinking. So what about the progression itself? Well, the progression again follows our theory exactly. If you look how the keys here move from one to the other, we have F, A flat, B flat, A flat, F, A flat, E flat, F. We're remaining in the right key. We're remaining in the key of F minor. So we're following that. We're following that fine. That's right too. Now, the only thing that may have drawn your attention is how we're moving from the E flat to the F. What about our cadence? Now, as I've said, the cadence should move from the dominant to the root, and the dominant is the V chord, the root is the I chord. So basically, that would, in our key here, that would be C to F. Well, yes, it is, but I've put another spin on that because, well, it's a pad that isn't playing along in the background with other instruments. Remember that in an earlier session, I said you don't have to perfect cadence, and some records don't. They use a different cadence to move between verse and chorus. Well, with pads, we have that flexibility. And therefore, once again, we can bend the theory ever so slightly. Remember that music theory is just that. It's a theory. And yes, in 99.9% of situations, as I've said, we should ideally end on a V to I. And if this was playing along with the background music, I would end on a V to an I. But it's not. This is in a breakdown. But I must stress this, I have still put a cadence in here, just in a slightly different way. Remember that we end a cadence with a V to an I, and that's the seventh note to the tonic. And what I've done is basically I've done that there. There's the seventh note, and there's the tonic. All I've done is put the leading tone as the root note of the chord. So we're still moving our leading tone to tonic, just slightly differently. So what about our harmonic balance and rhythm? Well, unsurprisingly, again, we're following the guidelines that we laid out in an earlier session. As I said, we must remain predictable when we work with these, and we are. The notes are all occurring in the same positions along there as we move through the bars, and our pitches are balanced. We move away, we move back. We move away, we move back. The only thing I've done is move some notes around so they don't all occur at the same time, which is going to help produce that moving sound. I've said this already, a good timbre is a mix of the composition, the synth, the effects, and the processing. And basically what I've done here is I thought, well, we're building a pad, it's got to evolve. So by stepping these like that, it's going to make the pad evolve as one note plays into another, into another, into another to create a chord at that position there. That build through there is obviously going to sweep up in the synthesis. Basically, we can say that in synthesis terms, I suppose, in a way, we've given each oscillator its own amp envelope. We've got one that starts straight away there, then another comes in there, another comes in there, and another comes in there. So each oscillator has its own amp envelope. Now, in reality, we can't do that in a synthesizer, but we can do it with our composition. So basically, looking at this chord progression, when you first saw it, you thought, what the hell is that? But we haven't done anything new here. We've just used some creative thought. We've remained with the theory because we know the theory works. All we've done is played around with it for a bit. We're being playful. We've created a playful harmony. Now, you quite simply have to think like this when you're programming chords. As I said time and time again, musicians sit down for hours banging away at chords and trying different movements, progressions and so forth to come up with progressions for their music. If it was as simple as sitting down and making a triad from C to F, G to C, they wouldn't be sat there for hours. They'd be sat there for seconds. So this is important. This is the experimentation. I can only tell you so much. I can only show you the theory in a DVD. I can't give you my creativity in a DVD. It doesn't work like that. The more you experiment with chords, the more creative you'll become, the more you begin to understand them as you play. But that is something that can't be given to you in a DVD. So with this chord progression down now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the theory behind programming a pad. And it will probably come as a little surprise to learn that, well, it's a lot like programming strings. Again, the first thing we need to do is decide on the sound of the pad. And if you have no idea, as I said in the earlier session, don't be setting surfing. Don't surf your presets. Go away and think about it. Otherwise, you'll end up accepting second best. And once you do that, you're on a downward slope for your music. So to begin with, what we need to do is we need to consider the colour of the timbre. How do we want it to sound? Well, I've got no idea at the moment because I've got no track in mind, but we'll say we want quite a laid-back pad, one that sweeps in frequencies, move from a low-end energy and sweeps up the range. So to do that, obviously we've got to say if we're going to sweep harmonics, we need something with harmonics in it, so that means a saw. And I'd like a bit of a rounded hollowness in it as well, kind of just to widen it a little bit. So that means we're going to put squares in as well. So let's call up our Vanguard. We'll use Vanguard again on an initialized patch. So let's start with, we'll pop that up there. And what we'll do is we'll start playback here. Now, let's start by picking something out here. We know we want a saw first of all, so let's just put a basic saw in first of all. And so we want it quite wide, so let's go for, I don't know, pulse. No, go for pulse. Pulse. I'll have 2 pulses in there, and you can hear how the pulse adds that square, that thickness to it. What I'll do, we'll pump them right up and get it nice, because this is a pad, remember, we want it nice and thick. Get that edge down, I think. Now, obviously, what we want to do is we want to set our main envelope here to create the pad type timbre. So let's increase this up a bit. Right, hear it straight away there. We'll go about there. Increase our decay there. We'll have a full sustain, I think. Down a bit there. Release. Yeah, obviously we want that on full level because that's modulating our amp envelope. Let's try this. That makes a big difference. So, oh no. No, I think we'll leave the cut-off alone for now. We'll use this to sweep the cut-off. We'll try detuning. a bit much there, you can hear that. It's, ooh. So we've got to push it as far as we can without it sounding pissed, really. Well, that's not sounding bad, that. What can we do next? We'll go in the LFOs. We'll modulate these with our LFOs here. Modulate oscillator 1 first. Modulating a bit much there, that I think. This resonance up a bit. Sure, I think we'll try. That's better. Get that key tracking up a bit. That's why it's more calm now. I think that 12 decibel was a bit too low there. Let's go in LFO 2 then. Let's modulate our next one. So I think we'll have this quite fast. What we'll do is. Don't want to go too wild here. I'll set that about there. Ooh. Obviously it's too fast, that LFO now is too fast to modulate our cutoff, otherwise it sounds a bit crap. Going 3 then. Do this a little bit faster again. And what we'll do is we'll move that opposite what we set our last pulse width modulation there. Set at 10, so we'll set this at -10. There we go. That's sounding quite nice. That we'll get this filter working on here. I think. So we're going to need quite a. This needs to obviously be slower than that one. So I'll go for around 3 seconds now, I reckon. What's that? Decay on full. Sustain on nothing. What's that release? I don't know. It's about 3/4, somewhere around there. And we'll set this. It's just a case of playing around with it, just try and get that. Done it quite well. A bit of amplification in there. Let's spread it a little. That up a bit. We've just got to play around this now and try and get the right type of sound. Oops. Don't want that moving around. Right, now let's try some effects on that. We've got basic timbre there. The first thing I want to do is we'll put the use a small space for that. On top of that, I think we'll then throw our Echo Boy on. We'll just give it just a bit of thickness in there. And again, we can throw on our filter for it, just add that little bit difference. I mean, the synthesizer isn't capable of adding this type of filter into this, so we can use it by adding our own. Set that up. We don't want it so even, we don't want it to flow evenly. Set this to 1 bar, we'll try 1 bar at the moment. We'll have some decapitator on that, which is kind of a... Right, there you go. A bit of drive to it. Just get our full ranger on there just to sculpt the final sound of that. Vanguard again there. Let's just try standard square for that one. Saw's quite nice. There we go. That's quite nice. There you go. Basically, that's how simple it really is. Obviously, it's changed that timbre. I can go in and as you saw there, I can play around the oscillators there. But basically, that's how simple they are. Choose the oscillators. I always find that pulse width modulation are good for pads along with saws. Then you just set the amp envelope and then just make sure that the attack of the second envelope, that's your modulation envelope, is set longer than the amp attack so that the filter can come in and sweep through those frequencies. Well, that's sounding quite well there. Quite. Just open that up a little. I mean, it's quite a sad chord progression anyway, but I wanted it quite pulling down, quite lo-fi for it anyway. I mean, basically, provided you modulate the oscillators with something, I mean, preferably an LFO to pitch or pulse width modulation, you'll have that movement in your oscillators, and That's what's important for pads. Now, one final thing I do want to mention before we draw this session to a close is basically pumping a pad. It's an incredibly popular effect, so what I want to do is just want to quickly run through it and show you how you do that. Now, you may notice that I've had a hidden track here. Ooh. Basically, it's a drum loop, or at least I should say it's a kick. I'll play that back now. I'll just set it to an output for you so you can actually hear something. Basically, that's it. And what we do, all we do there is, at the bottom here, we just call up a compressor. I'll just use a standard compressor, I think. And then the sidechain part here, if you're using Cubase, Ableton or whatever, I'm sure you can sidechain your compressors there, but all we do basically is choose the kick as the sidechain, 0 attack, set that up to about 2.4 to 1, something like that. On a peak, if you have the option root mean square or peak, set it to peak. You want that on a peak. And then just drop the release down, and then what we'll do is we'll go back to our kick here, and I'll say it's in no output again. And all it does basically is every time this kick comes in, these pads will duck. Bring this kick back in again. That's it, that's how you pump a pad now. Strings sound particularly well pumped if you put them into your mix. If you drop them in your mix and you're finding that your strings are kind of pulling your track back a bit, they're slowing it down, they're making it sound a bit, well, dragged rather than energetic, pump them, and you'll find that all of a sudden you'll add an incredible amount of energy to your track. But just be careful you don't pump them too hard, otherwise in a club system it can get a bit too dynamic and a bit complicated, difficult to listen to, and becomes quite irritating, a bit like Miley Cyrus again. But basically, there you go, that's it. As you can see, building pads and strings in any synth isn't difficult. Just remember that the quality of the pads you come up with are a direct result of the progression you composed, the chords, the synthesizer, the effects, the processors. They all work together to produce that final timbre. And on that note, we're at the end of this DVD. I've shown you the theory behind chords. It's incredibly simple. I've shown you the theory behind progressions. Again, that's quite simple. It's the application that's a little more difficult. You really have to think more laterally when you're writing chords. But the fact remains that the more you play and the more you experiment with them, the more you'll begin to realise just what works and what doesn't. And quite simply put, no DVD can ever replace that. Your own experimentation and creativity is the key. I'm sure you're going to see it on the internet saying, we'll teach you the secret of chords or progression, or we'll teach you the secret. There are no secrets. It's simply facts mixed with your own experimentation and creativity. That is the key. So at the end of the day, once you know that theory, the quality, the end result, what you come up with really is down to you and how much you experiment.